Good evening, I'm Kerry O'Brien. The Dutch will soon have the right to choose the time of their own death on compassionate grounds, and a majority of Australians appear to support the legislation of euthanasia as well. Should it be allowed, or are the moral dilemmas too great a hurdle? Join me straight after the news.
Clive Hale for ABC Late Edition News. Good evening, thank you for joining us. The battle for power in Russia leads tonight's bulletin, with President Boris Yeltsin meeting the heads of the Russian Parliament and the Constitutional Court to discuss the impasse. This comes after the Supreme Soviet voted to call an emergency session of the Congress of People's Deputies to consider impeaching the president. This report from CNN.
It took the Supreme Soviet less than an hour to set the date for a special session of the Congress of People's Deputies, the only body in Russia that has the power to impeach the president. Outside the walls of Congress, anti-Yeltsin demonstrators exploded in cheers when they heard the vote, shouting, "Yeltsin, this is war." But impeachment is not guaranteed. When Congress convenes this Friday, March 26, in Moscow, it will need a majority vote of the 1,033 members to initiate impeachment proceedings and a two-thirds vote for actual impeachment. But indications are they may have trouble mustering that two-thirds vote. And aides to Boris Yeltsin have said that regardless of what Congress decides, Yeltsin won't obey a vote to remove him. They say any attempt at impeachment would be illegal until Yeltsin is able to hold a referendum among the Russian people scheduled for April 25th. And polls now indicate that Boris Yeltsin would win that vote of confidence in his leadership.
The alleged ringleader of the World Trade Center bombing that killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000 has been arrested in Egypt and is being flown to the United States. Mahmoud Abu Halima, a New Jersey taxi driver, was arrested by Egyptian authorities in Alexandria and handed over to US agents in Cairo. North Korea has lifted a state of semi-war imposed in response to recent joint military exercises by South Korea and the United States. However, the North military commander has warned the nation not to let its guard down. US authorities are investigating the killing of more than 50 seals and sea lions off the coast of Washington state in the past month. Investigators say the animals are being shot offshore, but they don't have any firm leads on the culprits. Thousands of seals and sea lions call the cold northwest coast home, feeding on plentiful supplies of fish found in the waters. Because the animals eat tons of fish a day, they're not a favourite with the fishing industry. But authorities say fishing activity has been minimal in the area, and there's no evidence that fishermen are to blame for the deaths. The United Nations says Serb militia has grounded 4 UN helicopters on a mercy mission to the eastern Bosnian enclave of Srebrenica. The 4 French helicopters had landed at Zvornik, that's a Serb-held town in eastern Bosnia, and were prevented from leaving. 3 others which landed in the town were later allowed to leave. Under an agreement with the Serbs, the helicopters were to make an inspection stop in Zvornik on their way to Srebrenica to evacuate wounded Muslims. And back home, Adelaide police have charged a 29-year-old interstate man with arson following a spate of fires in the city today. Fires were lit in 6 buildings near Victoria Square in the heart of Adelaide, trapping dozens of workers and pushing the fire service to the limit. In the worst blaze, 6 people were rushed to hospital suffering smoke inhalation.
The fire service was stretched to the limit as 6 blazes broke out in buildings around Adelaide just before midday. Flames took hold in 3 of the buildings, stranding people in the upper floors, driven back by the engulfing smoke. The Metropolitan Fire Service, backed up by country firefighters, concentrated on the worst blaze, a 4-storey building in Franklin Street.
There's about 20 or 30 people on each level.
I started going down to the 2nd level, and I got down there, but it was so black you couldn't see a thing, and the smoke was really bad, and I could breathe okay, but I thought there's no way I'm going to make it down to the 1st floor if it's that thick.
With fire escapes blocked by smoke, firefighters had to rescue dozens of people by ladder and snorkel. 6 people were taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital suffering smoke inhalation. The fire service says only one of the buildings involved had a smoke alarm and none of them had fire detectors or sprinklers. In many cases, people were unaware there was a fire until they saw smoke coming through their door. Fire chiefs say it's extremely lucky no lives were lost.
A new era has dawned for the federal government with the swearing-in of Paul Keating's new ministry with 10 newcomers. The party celebrated in Canberra last night to mark Labor's 5th term in office.
The true believers rock to the tribal voice. This is how the Labor government celebrates its 5th victory on the trot. The music stopped in time for today's swearing in, but none of Labor's new top 30 was left fighting for a seat. Graham Richardson has bounced back into Cabinet as Health Minister. Peter Baldwin is elevated to Social Security. Bob McMullen goes straight into Cabinet, running Arts and Administrative Services, as do close Keating friend Laurie Brereton in the key portfolio of Industrial Relations, Michael Lee, who becomes Tourism and Resources Minister, and Michael Lavache as Attorney General, if he wins next month's by-election for the seat of Dixon. For the time being, Tasmanian Duncan Kerr will act in the job. He's one of 6 additions to the Outer Ministry, along with Frank Walker, George Gear, Rosemary Crowley, John Faulkner and Chris Schott. In other key moves, Alan Griffiths fought hard to win John Button's powerful industry portfolio, but almost forgot to sign on the dotted line. Peter Cook takes over Trade, which regains its cabinet status. Nick Bolkus is the new Immigration Minister. Gareth Evans becomes government leader in the Senate and retains Foreign Affairs. Robert Ray keeps Defence, John Dawkins Treasury, Ralph Willis Finance and Kim Beazley the Employment Portfolio.
The Independent Commission Against Corruption says it's uncovered a saga of corruption within the State Rail Authority, which has cost New South Wales millions of dollars. The Commission's probe into earth-moving contracts in the north of the state has revealed bribery, dishonest conduct and an absence of institutional controls. Commissioner Ronald Sackville has recommended that charges be considered against 10 people, 5 of them SRA employees. There's been a puzzling end to a 2-day inquest into a helicopter crash on the Queensland Gold Coast that claimed 7 lives. Gold Coast coroner George Wilkie ruled he couldn't establish an official cause of the Joy Flight accident.
It was Australia's worst helicopter accident. A SeaWorld-operated chopper was on a 5-minute sightseeing flight when it plunged into a beach on South Stradbroke Island. The crash killed 27-year-old pilot Glenn Wells and his 6 passengers. 2 years on, a coronial inquiry that heard evidence from more than 20 witnesses, including aviation experts, has been unable to determine an exact cause. Coroner George Wilkie says he accepts the findings of a Bureau of Air Safety investigation into the crash, which found the pilot lost control. Eyewitnesses described how the helicopter suddenly went into a climb, then plunged into the beach. The coroner declined to determine whether or not a heart condition discovered during an autopsy on the pilot contributed to the crash. What actually caused the pilot to lose control will, according to the coroner, never be known. Now the families of the victims will seek damages from the helicopter's manufacturer, the American Bell Company.
A man who shot someone he believed was an intruder on his property in Melbourne last year has been charged with attempted murder. Laurie Morris is a member of the Sporting Shooters Association and an expert marksman. A Melbourne court was told today he shot a man through the hip as he tried to steal an antique bed.
Laurie Morris was charged with attempted murder when he presented himself to CIB detectives this morning.
The charges that have been laid against me are ridiculous, outrageous, a waste of the taxpayers' money. There's no way known a jury will convict me of attempted murder.
This afternoon, the Melbourne Magistrates Court was told the shooting occurred in November last year in a derelict house owned by Morris. His counsel, Sean Cash, told the court 2 men came in through the back door of the house and attempted to steal an antique brass bed. It's alleged Peter Blake was trying to manoeuvre the bed through a door when Morris shot him through the hips with a high-powered hunting rifle. Mr Cash told the court it's a sad set of circumstances when someone defending their belongings had to resort to unnecessary violence to protect his possessions. Mr Morris is pleading not guilty to the 35 charges, including 1 of attempted murder and 16 for possessing an unregistered firearm. Mr Blake is facing 1 count of burglary, to which he is pleading guilty. The magistrate heard that the victim was also facing charges in another court across town. Peter Blake's counsel, Bernie Balmer, told that court his client's version of the shooting. He said at the time the house was in complete darkness and Blake believed Morris had lain waiting for them. After he shot Blake, he said, Morris pointed the gun at Blake's head and said, "Where's your effing mates?" Then he went out to hunt them down. The court was told Blake lost 40% of his bowel in the shooting and was declared dead when he arrived at hospital. Blake's sentence has been adjourned until next week. Morris will reappear in court in early May.
The New South Wales government has announced plans to cut the lead content of petrol to the lowest in Australia within 2 years. Claiming the move will protect the health of children in cities, the Fay government has called on all other states to match the New South Wales target. Premier Fay said that within 12 months, lead levels in petrol would be cut to match Victoria's, the state with the lowest amount. A year later, the lead level would be cut to 0.15 grams per litre. That's half the Victorian level. Australia's first survey of consumer attitudes has found that we're basically a contented lot. 90% of us, apparently, are satisfied with our lives. But, as Mark Simkin reports, we do have our distinct likes and dislikes.
That's not a common complaint in Australia, if today's consumer survey is any guide. The first of its kind down under, the survey ranks over 150 products and services from a consumer perspective. And it seems the things we like the most have a lot to do with bodily well-being. Fire departments top the list, with doctors and ambulances coming in close behind. But what about our most unsatisfactory products and services? Well, when it comes to value for money, the survey says Australians are most dissatisfied with the price they pay for petrol and with the interest charged on the credit cards they buy it with. Those dislikes make us remarkably similar to American consumers, although there are some surprising anomalies.
On individual items, such as the police department, there was a disparity. Your police department departments were rated lower than they are in the United States. Another one was banking, I think, showed up as a problem here.
In general terms, Australians are not so happy with used car dealerships, but even they compare favourably to the level of service provided by government departments. And Australia's most unsatisfactory service? That mantle has been reserved for television advertising.
Motorola dealers because they mean a business.
As the major banks consider cuts to their mortgage and business lending rates, they find themselves in a real dilemma. While lower interest rates please one class of customer, they alienate another, people who depend on the income of fixed interest investments.
As interest rates sink to levels not visited for a quarter of a century, some consumers aren't smiling. Retirees, in particular, who rely on interest earnings to fund their living costs, are having to confront a sudden drop in income. Banks face growing dissatisfaction over the skinny interest rates they're paying on ordinary deposits.
There is anxiety in some segments of our customer base.
From their peak, on-call deposit rates have fallen from as high as 14% down to present levels as low as 2% and may drop further following yesterday's official rate cut. Banks and cash management trusts are trying to combat an exodus of customers to institutions offering higher yielding investments, such as share and property funds. The Reserve Bank here has tried to reassure investors by arguing that because inflation is low, the erosion of the real value of their savings will be much less than when inflation was high.
Really, it's cold comfort to these people who probably 2 or 3 years ago were getting twice the fixed interest return on these retirement funds. They would have retired in the 80s, and now they're getting half the income. And these people are really having to confront how much of their capital they use to live.
To finance news now, and there was little movement on the markets today. The All Ordinaries Index was up 3.6 points. Our dollar closed about the same as yesterday at just over 70 cents US, but was slightly down on the trade-weighted index. Australian cricket captain Alan Border was critical of the Wellington pitch today following his side's defeat in the third one-day international against New Zealand. He said the slow, low wicket didn't provide the best conditions. Martin Crowe helped his side to 214, replying the Australians never looked a threat, going down by 88 runs. Now, a brief check of tomorrow's national weather for you. A late storm expected for Darwin, some showers and possibly storms for Sydney and Canberra, and showers also in Perth. It should be mainly fine in Melbourne, fine in Brisbane, fine in Hobart and fine in Adelaide. That's ABC News to this minute. I'm Clive Hale. Thanks for watching the ABC National Late Edition. We're back for you again tomorrow. Do have a good night.